Good morning. My name is Clancy and I'm an alcoholic. Welcome to the closing marathon meeting of the 53rd Alcoholics Anonymous Southern California Convention. I'm going to ask, I have some folks here to read for us. Brad, will you read how it works, please?
Brad, alcoholic. How it works. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. Those who do not recover are people who cannot or will not completely give themselves to this simple program. Usually men and women who are constitutionally incapable of being honest with themselves. There are such unfortunates. They are not at fault. They have seemed to have been born that way. They are naturally incapable of grasping and developing a manner of living which demands rigorous honesty. Their chances are less than average. There are those, too, who suffer from grave emotional and mental disorders, but many of them do recover if they have the capacity to be honest. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, and what we are like now. If you've decided you want what we have and are willing to go to any length to get it, then you're ready to take certain steps. At some of these, we balked. We thought we could find an easier, softer way, but we could not. With all the earnestness at our command, we beg of you to be fearless and thorough from the very start. Some of us have tried to hold on to our old ideas, and the result was nil until we let go absolutely. Remember that we deal with alcohol, cunning, baffling, powerful. Without help, it is too much for us. But there is one who has all power, that one is God. May you find him now. Half measures availed us nothing. We stood at the turning point. We asked his protection and care with complete abandon. Here are the steps we took which are suggested as a program of recovery. 1. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. 2. Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. 3. Made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. 4. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. 6. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. 7. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. 8. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. 9. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. 10. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly amended it. 11. Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. 12. Having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. Many of us exclaim, "What an order, I can't go through with it." Do not be discouraged. No one among us has been able to maintain anything like perfect adherence to these principles. We are not saints. The point is that we are willing to grow along spiritual lines. The principles we have set down are guides to progress. We claim spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. Our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after make clear 3 pertinent ideas. A, that we were alcoholic and could not manage our own lives. B, that probably no human power could have relieved our alcoholism. And that C, that God could and would if he were sought.
This is kind of a sentimental little thing. Many years ago, I came off Skid Row, out in the front teeth, no clothes, no nothing, and walked 72 blocks in the rain to get to an AA club where at least I get out of the rain. And I think the only living person who was in that club when I walked in, and the only one who ever was kind to me, certainly for a long time, was Andrew. I'd like to have her read the 12 traditions.
Good morning. I'm Angie Trejo, and I am an alcoholic. The 12 traditions. 1. Our common welfare should come first. Personal recovery depends upon AA unity. 2. For our group purpose, there is but one ultimate authority, a loving God as he may express himself in a group conscience. Our leaders are but trusted servants. They do not govern. 3. The only requirement for AA membership is a desire to stop drinking. 4. Each group should be autonomous except in matters affecting other groups or AA as a whole. 5. Each group has but one primary purpose: to carry its message to the alcoholic who still suffers. 6. An AA group will never endorse, finance, or lend the AA name to any related facility or outside enterprise. This purpose of money, property, and prestige divert us from our primary purpose. 7. Every AA group ought to be fully self-supporting, declining outside contributions. 8. Alcoholics Anonymous should remain forever non-professional, but our service centers may employ special workers. 9. AA as such should never be organized, but we may create service boards or committees directly responsible to those they serve. 10. Alcoholics Anonymous has no opinion on outside issues, hence the AA name will never be drawn into public controversy. 11. Our public relations policy is based on attraction rather than promotion. We need always maintain personal anonymity at the level of press, radio, and films. 12. Anonymity is the spiritual foundation of all our traditions, ever reminding us to place principles before personalities.
I didn't know she'd read it with an accent. I really hate to do this because it's a sellout, but I have to do it because for reasons of my own, one of the people I sponsor here has got a birthday today. Good morning. Happy birthday, Shirali. She's made me old before my time. This has been a wonderful convention. I've really enjoyed this convention. I thought the speakers were excellent, as good as any I've heard of any Southern California convention. We started the marathon on Friday noon with the message of Pass It On, which of course is the message of AA. And we went through any number of subjects. I just noticed one of the program this morning about 2 or 3 o'clock I could have talked on forever. It's called I, Ego, Me. Tell me about yourself. All right. And yesterday afternoon I wanted to get to that Al-Anon meeting. I'm afraid I slept through it, but it says, I didn't sleep through the meeting. I didn't get the meeting, but the topic was the miracle of me. Now, oh God. Maybe I'll become a double winner. But I'm glad to be here this morning, and it's been an excellent convention. The meeting last night was excellent. We'll hear another excellent speaker this morning, and it's a great event. I always love this convention. It used to be when I got sober, there were thousands of people attended the Southern California convention. At one time, there were 5,000 at the convention. And the reason they don't attend anymore, one of the great reasons, of course, is that there's been so many. This is the only convention in Southern California. Now they're just every few weeks there's a convention somewhere and people diffuse their efforts. But this still is the great old grandmother of them all, I guess, and I like it so much. But we've heard all about Alcoholics Anonymous, and I was interested in the topic I got this morning, the topic they gave me, and where do we go from here? Which is a reasonable question because we've had Alcoholics Anonymous, and over the years it's become clear to many people that some changes are required and some things should be changed. This year they had at the World Service Conference, they brought up for the first time suggestions to change the book, which they didn't do it, but they're continued to work at it. There's a movement afoot throughout Alcoholics Anonymous that we've become too strict in our membership requirements. You shouldn't have to be alcoholic because it's all one big disease, really. Alcoholism and drug addiction and gambling and overeating, all the various things. And there's some discussion about anonymities that has really become not necessary anymore for anonymity. We don't have to protect ourselves. In fact, if we had more celebrities announcing their A's, maybe we could draw more people in day when they realize that it's really not a terrible disgrace anymore to be an alcoholic, that it's kind of a recognition. And I remember in 1974, if any of you remember it, in Washington, they had a convocation of recovered alcoholics. A whole bunch of celebrities made the front page of every paper in the world. Big deal. Movie stars and big deals in the government. The Marquis of Queensberry was even one of them. Then there's also some talk now, about why are we so strict on medications? Because now, with the proliferation of medications and our knowledge of increasing mental discomfort, it's time that we should really not be so. Some of these groups are so hidebound, as although they act that they are doctors and telling you can't have these medications. And even one other thing that they have discussed a lot over the years is, should we say the Lord's Prayer? There have been many movements throughout the country and in the world to discontinue the Lord's Prayer. It's a too religious thing. It's a nice prayer, but should we not say the Serenity Prayer, which is less religious? It isn't connected with Christianity. Because we have a lot of members of other faiths who aren't Christians, and it may offend them to say the Lord's Prayer. And these are things you hear all over the country from time to time, seething around us. And maybe we should look into what we have to do here. And so I thought this morning I'd talk about how we can implement these things, or if we should implement these things, how they work. First of all, maybe the book should be changed. They've talked about some discussions about changes up to and including the steps, and where we take out the male pronoun and make it an it, or understanding God as we understand God, rather than God as we understand Him. Because it offends some women who are active in feminism, I guess, and they feel bad about it. And the book is kind of it's been a good book, and we've read it a lot, but maybe needs some changes. And so you have to look at it. What part shall we change? The thing that would be interesting about this is that it seems to be pretty most generally accepted among people who have been sober a while, that this book has been divinely inspired. Why is it we think it's divinely inspired? Because the guy who wrote it didn't know enough to write it. That's why. And that is an absolutely true story. He was 3 years sober. He was 3 years sober, surrounded by failure. We keep forgetting most of those early people died drunk. They weren't just big successful people. They died drunk. The guys who wrote the stories in the first edition, most of those guys died drunk. They were dying drunk all over. Getting drunk, staying drunk. And he wrote this book when he was 3 years sober, and he had no background in psychology or abnormal psychology or medicine or anything. And he wrote a bunch of things that he got an idea here, an idea there, an idea here, and it turned out to be a book. And this book, if you're new, as I've said many times, if you're new, you might think, God, by the time you're 3 years sober, you should know enough to write a book. But you will find that you don't. By the time you're 3 years sober, you won't know enough to write a book. By the time you're 5 years sober, you just try to be nice to people 3 years sober. Come back, Jimmy, you're doing a good job. By the time you're 10 years sober, you hate to send people 3 years sober to get your coffee. Because was that 2 creams and 1 sugar, or 2 sugars and 1 cream? Oh, never mind, I'll get it myself. By the time you're 20 years sober, you hate to have people 3 years sober unattended on your property. And this guy has written a book that didn't go over very well, didn't sell at first, took what? The millionth copy was given to President Nixon. That's how much later it went. Of course, it's really picked up since now. Now there's 1 million sold every couple of years, but then it took a long time. And why do they think this is such an inspired book? And why should we give it any attention? Because this book is called a miracle. Now, in AA we use the word miracle rather lightly. It's kind of, hear speakers say things like, I got up this morning, I looked at the eastern sky and the sun was coming up. And I knew that God had given me a miracle. He'd given me another day in which I could live sober. Get up tomorrow and have another look, you goof. You know. Miracles are supposed to be inexplicable, not explainable, not something that doesn't beyond human relation. What is the big miracle here? The miracle that in the history of mankind, this book has changed more alcoholic lives of our type in the last 65 years than all other therapies combined in the history of mankind. That's a miracle. Written by a guy who didn't know enough to write it and not accepted very well for a long time, and yet is the benchmark by which all of sobriety is based. And it's really a remarkable thing. And there are people who, for reasons of their own, want to change it. And at least as far as the book is concerned, I would certainly fight to the death any right to change it, because we might be changing the thing that works. Who knows? So I think where we go from here, we'll give that book another chance. We'll try it for a while longer. But the membership now, the membership is a little different thing. Because there's all kinds of people who come to AA who are probably not alcoholics as we understand them, and narcotics addicts and various people. And the people say, what's the big deal? It's one big disease. I'll tell you, let me start off by telling you where that phrase came from. That it's all one big disease. Alcoholism, drug addiction, gambling, food. That came from a treatment center that only had one van. Oh, we're in the truck. We're going to the meeting. Because some of the van is leaving. Run, run. Probably an overeater. Yeah. It's hard to understand this concept if you're kind of new, but it really isn't so hard once you stay here a while. That it may be the recovery seems to be much the same, but the illness is not the same. And the one thing that makes Alcoholics Anonymous work is that it engenders something that nothing else does. It engenders identification. Without that, it is just more advice. That is why years and years ago, members of Alcoholics Anonymous, who were also narcotics addicts, wanted to start something where the narcotics addicts could come and identify with the illness. And so they started Narcotics Anonymous. That's why years and years ago, Sybil Corwin's ex-husband, Jim Willis, was a gambler as well as an alcoholic, and he wanted to have some place for gamblers to come and identify. And he established Gamblers Anonymous. All of these established in Los Angeles when I was new in AA. A woman established who was an eater, also in AA, established Overeaters Anonymous. All of them were established so that people with that illness or that whatever it might be could come and identify. Because without identification, it is nothing. I never really understood the intensity that identification brings. I was about 2 years sober in 1960, and I still didn't have any front teeth, but I'd learned to carry my lip like this. And I had some hand-me-down clothes that people gave me, but I was staying sober and felt pretty good, actually. And I was talking at a meeting at the 6300 Club one day just on obsessions. And I'm an authority on obsessions, not the recovery from them, but the obsessions themselves. And I gave a wonderful talk. And some woman came up afterwards, rather semi-plump woman, said, we've started a new organization over on Olympic Boulevard called Overeaters Anonymous. Would you go over and talk to our ladies about overeating? About the obsessions? I said, sure. I weighed 130 pounds about. And so the next Sunday I went over there and gave a little talk on obsessions. The table with about 10 fat ladies sitting around it. And I apologize. I don't know if there were ladies, but there were 10. I didn't mean to offend you. But there were 10, and I gave a good talk. And I sat down and felt really, I've helped these girls. Then they had some identification. They talked, they shared. This one woman over here talked about making a cake. She made a 2-layer cake for her son's birthday. Her husband went down to Long Beach to pick up her son. She tried one little piece, then another little piece. By the time they got back, the cake was gone. And I didn't say anything because I'm too nice a guy, but I thought, Jesus. A little taste maybe, but Christ. Woman over here talked about eating a gallon or a half a gallon of ice cream, some tremendous amount. And I didn't say anything. I'm too nice a guy, but I remember thinking, no wonder you're fat, for God's sakes. Use a little restraint. Over here, a woman talked about eating till she couldn't eat anymore, went into the bathroom, put her finger down the throat, and puked so she could eat some more. And I thought to myself, don't bother shaking hands with me after the meeting. But I thought about that later when I got older and smarter. The only difference between us is food did not do for me what it did for them. And alcohol did not do for them what it did for me. There was no identification. I understood it intellectually, but there was no identification. And the thing that has made Alcoholics Anonymous so important is that identification. As most of you know, there was another organization like Alcoholics Anonymous in the 1840s called the Washingtonians. Some drunks got together. 6 old barroom drunks got together, started a group, and everybody laughed at them. But they had a little group, and pretty soon they grew a little bit. They got a couple more people, and nobody could believe it. By 1841, they were in several states, and by they selected Washington's birthday as their birthday. They'd started right around that time, and for example, in January, they sent a letter to all the places they could find that they had a little chapter saying, have someone from your city come in and discuss, talk about things for our anniversary. We have no great reason to hear what they've got to say, but we want them to see we're not crazy people. We're just people staying sober. And all over the country, they did that. If you ever look at a book of Lincoln's speeches, he was the young man chosen in Springfield, Illinois, to go talk to the Washingtonians. There's a speech to the Washingtonians, and he gives a long talk on various subjects. But the gist was, I know you people. You're sensitive, intelligent people. I just don't have the thirst you have. I don't understand it, but I really wish you well. But it really continued to grow, and by 1845, it was remarkable. They had, no radios, no television, no telephones, no nothing. What they had were mass meetings, and they got some great speakers who would go out and get these mass meetings, just turn them sober, almost. And by the 1845, they estimated they had about 100,000 sober drunkards. When you think that's that much, AA after 5 years didn't even have 1,000 yet, and they just tremendous. And what happened to them is they got thinking, if we could help alcoholics, I'll bet we could help a lot of people. We could help narcotics addicts who aren't alcoholics. Not narcotics as we know today, but in those days, laudanum, opium. We could help people with emotional problems. We should get involved in politics. Maybe we could help get involved in some of the anti-slavery movement. We should see if we can help annex Texas, for God's sakes. All sorts of things. These dedicated people, and they all went out there and did these things. A lot of them got in the temperance movement. Stamp out alcohol sales. That'll take care of the problem. And they just all worked full blast at it. And by 1848, the Washingtonians were extinct. And with very few exceptions, they all died drunk on the street. I had a book home written by one of them who was one of the few survivors some years ago, and he talks about, I don't know what happened. We were doing so well, and people got too busy to come to our meetings. They were helping other people. What happened? No more identification. Everyone in this room, or any room like this, has had enough advice to last them for 10,000 years. That is really true. But if you can find someone that you believe knows how you feel, that advice becomes meaningful information. That's what saved my life, and I'm sure that saved the life of you. If you can find someone that you respect and believe knows how you feel, you will take actions even though they seem stupid to you and non-applicable. And that's the story of AA. Because Alcoholics Anonymous really is the same this morning as it was June 10th, 1935 in Akron. It is not the book, it's not meetings, they didn't have any of these things. What they had was this: one alcoholic talking to another alcoholic to help him reduce his feelings of difference at least enough so that he will begin to take actions he does not yet believe in. That's what AA is about. That's the germ. That's the foundation of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's why it is so important that alcoholics come to Alcoholics Anonymous and be alcoholics. I've been working off and on to help narcotics addicts for 30 years. But when I go to an AA meeting, I don't want to hear somebody talk about shooting up or sniffing up or anything else. You know, it's an amazing thing. They may give a wonderful talk and it's funny and we all think it's cute and we laugh hard. But it doesn't grab you as much as some guy that barely can talk. I don't know, that drinking has really been ruining my life and my sponsor's helping me. I'm starting to feel a little better. And I've had a drink for several weeks now and I'm getting some hope. And thank you very much. Yeah, baby! Now you can be an alcoholic. What the people forget sometimes, you can be an alcoholic and an addict, an alcoholic and an eater, an alcoholic and a gambler. Incidentally, Gamblers Anonymous, interesting thing there too. Jim Willis, this great guy, nice guy, formed Gamblers Anonymous, which became the most successful, the first and most successful of all the non-AA 12-step groups. It's all over the world. Where there's gamblers' problems, Gamblers Anonymous is there. And he got so involved in it and worked so hard in it year after year that he really got away from AA. So they felt very surprised when he got drunk and died. He didn't gamble, but he got drunk and died because he didn't take care of this obsession, which is kind of a shocking thing. But anyway, Alcoholics Anonymous, you can be all these things. The only thing that's wrong sometimes is because we work so hard to overcome our feelings of difference that it's really so counterindicated when people get to the point and say, I'm an alcoholic and an addict. I'm an alcoholic and an overeater. We don't care. We don't care. Out in Covina, I'm so proud of Mac Brewster. He's found a solution to that problem. He's told the members, if you have 2 diseases, put twice in the basket. I don't want to say they're cheapskates in Covina, but that stopped the habit right there. And I'm going to see if I can't introduce it to my group, too, if I can. But an and, because the trouble with being an and is this. What you're saying is, look, I'm different than you are. And that's the biggest thing we have to overcome, is that feeling of difference. All the things are designed here to help us stop being different and to fit in. And so you really, despite what anybody might tell you, it is the reason for Alcoholics Anonymous to have membership requirements of being an alcoholic is not that we're above you or below you or anything else. It is so that a newcomer will come in and find someone who he thinks knows how we feel. To this day, if someone says, I never drank, but I took a lot of drugs, I know how you feel. Nah, druggies are different than me, pal. I mean, narcotic, heroin, I knew this 50 years ago. Heroin addicts take heroin to get out of the world. Alcoholics drink alcohol to get into the world. What a difference that is. Hey, baby. One of the problems that NA has had all over the world, the reason it's never become terribly successful, in my opinion, I'm just giving you my opinion now, of course, and I only speak for myself and Bill and Dr. Bob. Is that heroin addicts have a tendency to chill out. I mean, I've gone to a lot of AA meetings and say, hey, man, chill out. I don't hear that shit about the steps. Shit. You know. I just went to some bad meetings, but those were 40 years ago. But I remember going to them and I think to myself, too bad you're not giving any enthusiasm. The enthusiasm that comes with AA. I remember reading a definition once in the dictionary. What a great for the word enthusiasm. It comes from a Greek, en, within, theos, God. Enthusiasm, the expression of the God within. Of course, it's come to mean something entirely different, but that isn't a bad description of enthusiasm. God within operating through you. Some God that never did not know exist. But I suppose we have to understand That without identification, it's just another bunch of advice. It's just another group therapy. It's just another bunch of people telling people what they think. And that is why it is imperative, in my opinion, that Alcoholics Anonymous must insist that you're an alcoholic. There are even alcoholics who are questionable, because there seem to be types of alcoholics. There seem to be some alcoholics who can quit drinking, and that's all they do. Then after a few years they get bored, so they go to AA. And most of us aren't like that. We are alcoholics of a different type. As Bill Wilson says in his book, alcoholics of our type. People who will always drink again unless something happens. And so sometimes you'll go to meetings and you'll find alcoholics who've been sober for many years. I didn't do any of that stuff. I'm sober. And you wonder, how can that be? Then you got to remember, pal, you're not an alcoholic of my type. Because if I didn't do that for 1 week, I'd be drunk. And those, especially when I was getting sober. I might last longer now, but I'd be awful unhappy. I'd be awful unpainful. And I might be like some of these people who stay sober after all the time. They put a gun in their mouth and blow their brains out rather than take simple actions to overcome it. The other problem we hear a lot these days is, why must we remain anonymous? Why must we? Well, let me synthesize the last one by saying, I think we should keep the book for a while. Maybe we should keep our identification as an alcoholic, be an alcoholic to be here. But anonymity, why would you have to be anonymous? I mean, all these movie stars say they're in AA and government figures sometimes and celebrities. And it's, maybe at one time in the 1930s and 40s, people had to be ashamed of being an alcoholic, but not anymore. It's now it's has nothing to do with we don't need protection. And I guess when anonymity was created, it was created to protect people. But over the years, oddly enough, it has changed significantly. It no longer has anything to do with protection of anybody except ourselves against ourselves. Anonymity, the principle of anonymity is as Bill Wilson said, has become a deeply spiritual thing. The last letter he wrote before he died said, let us maintain anonymity. We must keep anonymity. It's this deep spiritual thing because it keeps us from, I'll tell you what it does. Over the years, I've never seen anyone, in my experience, break their anonymity that profited from it. When I first got sober, there was a woman, they used to talk about her not, like Lillian Roth. She was a famous singer. And she wrote a book called I'll Cry Tomorrow. I said, I'm now a member of Alcoholics Anonymous and I'm doing well. They said, you shouldn't do that, Lillian. She said, it's going to help a lot of people come to AA because they know that a person of my stature is sober. And a couple years later, when she was laying face down drunk in Palm Springs, vomiting up her pills and booze, I don't know what anybody thought about AA. I don't think she heard AA at all, but it destroyed her. Remember when I was new, too, I looked at Diana Barrymore, John Barrymore's daughter. She wrote a book called Too Much Too Soon. I remember reading that, and she talked about how Alcoholics Anonymous had helped her. Helped her so much, actually, that now with the aid of AA, she had a little wine with dinner. I thought, geez, I'm going to get in that group, you know. Here's some water left over from Johnny Harris. Why, it's turning into wine. I keep telling him it's the other way. It's the other way. But, and when she got drunk and went to jail and had a terrible time and died drunk, people wonder, why would that be? She was doing so well. And I'm sure many of you remember that they've had all kinds of cures for but anonymity, when it's broken, happens again and again. And they never seem to. Today we see movie stars who talk about, I'm an Alcoholics Anonymous, and a month later they're up for drunken driving again, all sorts of things. Why would that be? Why shouldn't you break your anonymity? How would that harm anything? And I guess as far as anybody can tell, it's this. When I say, look, I'm an alcoholic, and you should come to AA because important me is here, I am helping AA. AA is no longer helping me. I've just risen above it. I've now learned my lesson. I'm going to help these poor little strugglers in AA. And somehow you rise above AA, and pretty soon there is no place to turn. When you need help, you can't go to AA. You've already been through that and help them. What do you do now? And they all seem to go down. If they don't go down, they feel bad, bad, bad. There's no place to turn. Anonymity is such an important thing. You know, over the years, there have been all kinds of alternatives to AA. Atheists in AA, or atheist alcoholism, where you don't have to maintain your anonymity. The recovery in AA. Some of you remember that program in 1990. They A&E put on a hour-long special on Alcoholics Anonymous, on alcoholism. And there were 4 people they interviewed, one in New York, one in Minneapolis, one in down south in Los Angeles. I was the guy in Los Angeles. And we maintained our anonymity. Perhaps now you remember me. And we talked about alcoholism, we saw fit. But they also had a woman on there who was a graduate of AA and had founded something called a recovery movement. And she had her book. She had a book. She said, "This is my book." And charming woman. And she said, I used to think that Alcoholics Anonymous was correct, but it isn't. You can drink socially if you follow certain simple rules. And I thought, Jesus. Now, they did her interview in January. When the program came on in June, they didn't put it in the program, but they should have. They put it in the newspaper. She was in the Washington State Penitentiary for vehicular manslaughter. Drunk, she wiped out a family in a crosswalk. Just boom, drunk. And the last we heard from her was in July. She had a little press release saying, "I'm going back to AA when I get out." And I wanted to write her and say, "Oh, Jesus, we're so excited, you." But I didn't, because I'm too nice a guy. But anonymity seems to be a strong spiritual thing. And it's a hard thing, because it keeps me from using AA for self-aggrandizement. And a lot of people do that, and they put themselves in an entirely different situation. The purpose of anonymity is to surrender yourself to the good of the entire whole. It's to not use AA for your aims, but to be a member. As Johnny was saying in the last hour, that to sit in the seats and be a member. Sit in the seats and be a member. So it looks as though anonymity ought to really be kept, even though there's arguments against it, not by anyone who's successful. Now they talk about this medication. Now that's getting hot in this country. I don't know, it seems, and I'm not just giving you an opinion from what I've seen, because I travel around a lot, but everywhere I go I hear people say, "God, the treatment centers here are filled them up with antidepressants and released them when they got out." And they come out of those many treatment centers just loaded with antidepressants, and they say, "Look, we're doing a good job, aren't we, Fred?" "Yes, we are." And most of them never drink again until they ran out of antidepressants. But in modern pharmacology, antidepressants have really become rather good. And it isn't like just the old days of Valium, where you did the Valium shuffle. These are rather advanced things. But the keynote is this: for old fundamentalists, old dinosaurs, is that if possible, the purpose of Alcoholics Anonymous is not to get you off alcohol, it is to get you into reality. That's the purpose. If you're on alcohol, you have to get off it. But it's to get into reality, to start chewing your alcohol instead of drinking it. To many people, is not the exact what we should do. Now, there's no question about it. There are people who have mental illnesses who need medication. But doesn't it seem strange to you that about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a terrible epidemic of bipolarism? I mean, Jesus, everybody that you saw was, "I'm bipolar." And now a lot of them they're no longer bipolar. They've had some, but I don't know where they are now. But 25, 30 years ago, it was, what is that, Dave? The hyperinsulinism. It's what is it? Hypoglycemia. Everybody in AA had not everybody in AA, but a lot of the fringers had hypoglycemia. Well, I really don't like to take these things, but my doctor says I have hypoglycemia. And they got out of that since they wanted sugar again. They stopped being hypoglycemic. But there's always some new movement. I remember, some of you remember in 1972, the Rand Corporation put out a great big movement that alcoholics could drink again. And a lot of us studied that kind of interestingly, and they did a follow-up, and they were all sober. They're taking care of themselves. And it wasn't for 3 or 4 years that finally a non-allied doctor finally did the follow-up, found them all drunk. I said to a guy in the Rand Corporation, how in the world did you do your follow-up? I thought these people were sober. He said, I don't know. We called him and asked him. Can you see some puke somewhere? Yeah, still doing all right. The problem of medication is a severe one. And to show you the strength of the medications, it is very dangerous to cold turkey off them. That is like a strong medication. And for people such as me, and I know people that think the way I do, I would never tell anybody to get off those strong medications, because that is lethal. But I tell them this when people come to me, let us go to your doctor and see if we can start withdrawing you little by little. Because you're going to have to get off them. And you're on them without even being aware of what they're doing to you. And to get off them. Maybe if you're just diagnosed later by a reputable person as having some severe mental problem that you have to have them, then take them. I know some people who take them in our group who are, without them, they're raving maniacs. But mostly it's just a quieting mechanism. And it's just, I think that we have to really be very careful that Alcoholics Anonymous is not overrun by people. And people get up at podiums everywhere and say, yes, I take these medications. Are you a doctor? You can't tell me not to. That's true. But I'm a sober alcoholic who was once upon described by the best doctors in Texas as being a schizophrenic with paranoid tendencies, and that I'd have to take medications every day for the rest of my life. And I took them until the time I couldn't afford them anymore. And found out that the pain of sobriety made me take actions that made it unnecessary to take medications. I know that some people will require them, and I know it's a very sensitive subject. But I tell you, if you're on medications or acknowledging them, you are losing a great part of sobriety, which is living in the reality of now and being part of things and having some downs. The trouble with alcoholism is such, the nature of alcoholism, it is also, especially when you get sober, you have big swings. It looks almost, years ago it used to be called, everybody thought they were manic depressive. They're all manic depressive. Then they were bipolar. And they look exactly like bipolar because these big swings. But what I don't seem to understand that here, this organization is designed to cut down those swings. That's what it's about. It is to gradually make one mature. I've always thought that's one of the great problems in Alcoholics Anonymous for people like me. As my sponsor told me years ago when I was new, he said, most people, all human beings, when they grow up, they're faced with problems and situations and conflicts and things they should do and things they shouldn't do and on and on. It's just a lot of learning. It's called maturing. And by the time you're a mature personality, you don't really have big swings. You think, that's not as important as I thought. And it's just kind of taking care of things and staying out of problems. And as he said, people like us outsmart that process. As we grow up and get going, we discover that when a problem comes, I can get rid of it. Here's to you, household finance. And it's great. In fact, I escaped a lot of things. The only problem is when the day comes where your drinking is so bad you don't have to stay sober. You find yourself in a position that you cannot identify except from outside. But boy, I never would have in 10,000 years identified the fact. Here I am, grown-up brain, grown-up body, grown-up strength, grown-up skills, grown-up rationalizing, grown-up verbal abilities, and never once guessing that I'm at the intermittent beck and call of childish emotions. We call them alcoholic emotions because that's a little more acceptable. But what are alcoholic emotions? I love you. I hate you. I'm going to run away. Let's get married. You hurt my feelings, you son of a bitch. I'm going to kill you. Big swings, baby. I've never been so happy. Let's commit suicide. I've never, And that's what the actions of AA are designed to cope with. Not the fact that you want to drink, but the fact that made you have to drink. And so that is why it seems to me that of the people I have known who I brought off medications, that's water. I drank at home. I washed at home. I drink coffee. Keeps me awake during my talks. The medication, people I've brought off medication that I have known have always been very glad and never had any desire to go back, because that's what AA is about. And the other thing I should say about that, you say, but how about the pain? The pain. That's right. The pain is what makes AA work. Pain is what motivates people like me to take the steps. I don't take them because I think they're wonderful. I take them if I want to commit suicide if I don't take them. The best example of that I know is that some years ago, this guy I sponsored had put the flag on the moon, and he called me up. He said, they're having a big convocation of Russian and U.S. astronauts at the French legation in Lyon, France. I said, that's great. He says, and we're going to go over the SST. I said, that's wonderful. He said, but we're supposed to bring a guest, and my wife and I are divorced, and my children are out of the country. Who can I possibly take? That's a tough one. Well, I sacrificed myself and went with him. Kind of guy I am. And we got on the SST in New York. You can't get on anymore because it's discontinued. But what it is, it's a long, narrow plane with 2 plush seats on either side all the way back. And on the bulkhead up here is a clock with one hand. You take off in New York, it goes to about 1/4 after. Then you look over. Then you get over the ocean, and the clock starts moving. It goes all the way on to 12. You're now at the speed of sound, and it keeps going. And you're up at 50,000 feet, and the sky is black, and you can see the curvature of the earth. And when you land, I hope we got good brakes on this sumbitch. We'll be in Brussels or someplace. But what they do, they don't have any special thing. They do the same thing they do when you land in LAX on a regular plane. They reverse the thrust of the jets. The same jets that pushed you this way, now they stop you. Just use handbrakes just at the last possible moment. But they stop you. And the reverse of the thrust. I've often thought that really is an analogy for Alcoholics Anonymous. The same pain that makes it imperative for me to get relief if it's drinking, whatever I have to do. If I can find someone that I trust enough and believe in and think knows how I feel, I may give him the power to reverse the thrust of that pain and use that very same pain to make me take actions I would have never taken on my own. That's the way I took my inventory. I was on my way to commit suicide, and I told my sponsor, I've taken my inventory with a psychiatrist for thousands of dollars. What do I want to take with an out-of-work actor, for Christ's sake? What good's that going to do? I said, my judgment, that's the last thing in the world I need. And he explained that to me. He said, in your judgment, you live in the back seat of an abandoned car, for Christ's sake. If I want your judgment, I'd put my head in the back window and ask you for it. Made me crazy. And I wrote an inventory that day. Saved my life because I felt so bad I put in things I never told anybody. Never told my psychiatrist, because when you're paying that kind of money, you can't risk rejection. I don't want some little wussy to say to me, you did what, sir? Get out of my office. But first of all, wash off that chair, will you? It's interesting that the actions that saved my life were taken under duress of pain. that if I could have taken medications for, I would never have done, and I'd be dead. It's just that simple for people like me. So I'm an old-fashioned type, and believe me, I'm not a one who likes pain. I hate pain. I understand people who hate pain, and I understand why people want to take medication to get away from pain. But in Alcoholics Anonymous, psychological and emotional pain is what drives you to take actions that will make it unnecessary to have that pain again. That's what it's about. So you've got to be very, very careful about medications or telling your people you sponsor to have medications. Of course, that's only my opinion. I'm not speaking for AA at all. And you can say, you're not a doctor. But I sponsor a doctor, and I know more than he does. You wouldn't want me to lie, would you? I used to sponsor a psychiatrist, too, but I couldn't quite get him straight. The last thing that we talk about now, I'll get over with it, is the Lord's Prayer. There are movements afoot to get the Lord's Prayer out of the way, because it's too religious. It's a Christian prayer. Jews shouldn't have to say it. Muslims shouldn't have to say it. Why don't we just close with the Serenity Prayer? The Lord's Prayer is too religious. In the first place, it's kind of funny. There's very little religion in the Lord's Prayer. The Serenity Prayer, if you ever read that's just an excerpt from a longer prayer. That's the most religious prayer you ever wrote. It's like being back in the Lutheran church on a bad day, But they've taken one little excerpt from it. But there's nothing in the Lord's Prayer that I can see that should be offensive. Our Father who art in heaven, if you don't think He's in heaven, that's your privilege. But you say it because that's what they do here. It's like saying, I think the Lord's Prayer offends me. I think the fourth step offends me. Who cares if it offends you? Your life is a shambles, for God's sakes. If it looked good to you, we'd all be in trouble. And you talk about the big argument in Minneapolis for a number of groups stop saying this, we have new Jewish members who are offended. I just can't believe that. I sponsor 12 Jewish people. None of them are offended. We meet in a synagogue. When the rabbi comes by our meetings, he says the Lord's Prayer. He's not offended. But some new little snot in Minneapolis is offended. Who cares? Who cares? Go join recovery. Maybe you can drink again socially. No, I don't mean that. That's the only line in the book that I disagree with. It says, if you don't believe us, go drink some more and try it, because you may never get back. But I know what he's talking about. But the Lord's Prayer really is such an innocuous thing. It says it asks us to surrender our will, which the steps ask us to do, and just we try to be kind to other people, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us, which is the 8th and 9th steps, and on and on. And there's nothing in there at all. And it's so ridiculous, but it's just that continuing neurotic need to change something that's working. We look through the things that are up for change now. The book, ridiculous. Why change it? Because all these things deal with human emotions. And we have advanced technology, we have advanced airplanes, we have advanced rockets, we have all sorts of things. But human emotions haven't changed in 5,000 years. When I get cut off on the freeway, I feel exactly the same way as the Pharaoh of Egypt when they got a bunch of grasshoppers infesting Egypt. God damn it! As far back as you can read literature, they deal with the same emotions. Love, unhappiness, sometimes sadness, bereavement, joy. All the things that we talk about have never changed in human beings. Our mechanical skills and our scientific skills have advanced quantum leaps. But we are still dealing with human beings, which is one of the reasons, of course, that makes human beings kind of at risk sometimes, because our advances go on and on. We have atomic energy, we have atomic bombs, but every human being has to start at ground zero. Again, you can't transmit human maturity. Everybody's got to become mature on their own by doing things and learning and becoming wise. We have to hope that people will learn this. So I don't think that where do we go from here? Should we change the book? Don't think so. Should we loosen up our requirements to be a member of AA? I don't think so. That'd make it unworkable. Should we break our anonymity, maybe? Is it okay to break our anonymity? I don't think so. I've never seen anybody do it successfully that felt better afterwards. It doesn't help AA, but it certainly destroys the person who's doing it. Should we take medications? Maybe a few rare people who are mentally ill and so described and identified should be. But the run-of-the-mill alcoholics can ruin their lives by doing it, to get away from pain that is essential for their growth. And finally, should we close the meeting with the Lord's Prayer? You bet, because they've been doing it for a long, long time, for 60-some years, and no one seemed to have been harmed by it yet except those who fight against it. So really, where do we go from here? Well, I guess we go back to duty. There's nothing left to do much to change it. The only things we have to do now is try to keep people from changing it around us. Because this works. It's the only thing that ever has worked. It has helped people like me and has helped people like you. I fought against AA for 10 years until I finally got so sick I tried it, and it worked the first time I tried it, and it's worked for 46 years. And I'll tell you, I believe strongly in it, and I became a convert, not because I was starry-eyed when I got here. I think that maybe we ought to continue and listen to the people around us and follow our betters ahead of us and try to help those people behind us and do the same things that make people like us live with quiet emotions, to surrender to God what is God, not to man what is man, and to live with some degree of dignity. And to the best of my knowledge, I know of no other solution. And just to top it off, please join me in the Lord's Prayer.